Hello and welcome to the Ukrainian Toronto Television. And today's topic is Hungary. Hungary is in the news lately, and I'm not sure it's a good thing because a lot of problems with Hungary lately. Because you've probably seen the viral video how Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, cornered Victor Orban, prime minister of Hungary, in Argentina on the inauguration of Argentina's new president, which is wild. And Orban obviously denied meetings with Zelensky for a long time, and it was kind of coincidental. The video is wild, but also what's more shocking from the news is that Orban allies are participating in the event in the United States, Heritage Foundation, which is a Republican foundation in the United States.
Think tank.
Yeah, where they are going to advocate against Ukraine's aid. We have a great guest today, Dalibor Roháč, who is senior fellow at American Enterprise Institute, and who will help us uncover what's the deal with Republicans in Orban, and what's the deal with Hungarian guys going to US advocating against Ukraine. Also, what's the deal with Hungary advocating, blocking EU aid to Ukraine and blocking EU accession talks to the for Ukraine? Dalibor, hi.
Hi.
Hello, it's great to be with you, Melania, Mark. It's a pleasure. And so those are at least 5 different questions bundled into one. Let me try to unpack that a little bit. First of all, I don't want to give too much credit to Orban, but I don't think it's entirely illegitimate for Ukraine's neighbors to weigh into conversations about US assistance to Ukraine. I mean, you could make the argument that Hungary, like other countries of the region, are affected in different ways by the war, and they might have opinions about what the US role in the conflict should be. We've seen, just 10 days ago, former Prime Minister of the UK, Liz Truss, was in Washington advocating for greater US assistance to Ukraine. Boris Johnson, after leaving office, has been coming through America regularly, also lobbying Republican lawmakers in order to push for more assistance. Polish leaders have made the same argument. So it's not inherently wrong for Hungarians to have an opinion.
But it makes sense when you advocate for, but it doesn't though when you advocate against. I understand the logic is
that's right.
flawed.
But the odd thing is, why would a Central European country, which is part of NATO, which is part of the European Union, which nominally is an ally of the United States and should share, broadly speaking, the same interests and values, be basically trying to sabotage its own neighbor that is trying to defend itself against Russian aggression? And to explain that, I think it's worth sort of looking beyond Orban a little bit and look at, sort of Hungarian geopolitical outlook, if you will. I think there's a sort of charitable way of looking at it, and there are less charitable ways. The most charitable way I can come up with is really the fact that, as this wave of global instability unfolded towards the end of Obama years, beginning of Trump years, Hungary took a very different view of what its own behavior should be in this new world from some of its neighbors. So, for Poland, this wave of global instability has really meant that people have started to invest seriously into the transatlantic relationship. I mean, Poland has been building up its military, has been taking seriously the relationship with the US, whereas in Hungary, the prevailing idea was that in this new and unstable world, Hungary's interest would be best served by, working more closely with Russia, with China, trying to balance different global powers, and hopefully drawing some benefits for Hungary while doing so. I don't think it's a particularly wise outlook for a small Central European country to take, but you can understand it by looking at Hungary's own history and the role of 1920 Trianon Treaty and the sort of grievance-driven politics that it has given rise to in Hungary. And that's something that Victor Orban has very skillfully exploited in the Hungarian conversation, this idea that particularly Western powers have committed a grave injustice against Hungary in 1920, and that sort of the great Hungarian kingdom was downsized radically, and ethnic Hungarians were left stranded beyond its borders. And that's something that needs to be rectified. And so I think one sort of more worrying read of what Orban is doing is that he's, leveraging these grievances and perhaps setting a stage for a situation in which, should Russia succeed, should there be more instability, there would be an opportunity for Orban and for Hungary to actually make claim to, some of these ethnically mixed territories around.
But Dalibor, say Russia wins, but even for a person like Orban, it's obvious that Russia is not particularly known for giving out lands, right? They do exactly the opposite. So why would that be a safe bet in his mind?
Well, it's not a safe bet, but I think there is a sort of calculation that it's a delusion of grandeur, truly. I mean, the idea that somehow Orban, unlike other European leaders, can deal with Mr. Putin and Mr. Xi as equals, right? That he would be the one sort of sitting at the table and striking these deals. It's completely out of proportion with Hungary's actual weight in the global economy, its actual hard power, soft power, etc. But it's a position that actually is attuned to where, a big part of the Hungarian public is, unfortunately. I mean, the worrying thing about Hungary is not simply the entrenchment that we've seen under Orban. It's, very hard to run successfully in an election against him, because of the media market that's being controlled by Fidesz, the ruling party, because of, the absence of rule of law, because of the fact that, this really is a sort of electoral autocracy in many ways, but also the fact that he remains popular. I mean, he does win with very wide margins. And I think even if he were to sort of switch into a perfectly fair political system, he would still command a very sizable popular support. Now, on top of that, obviously during that decade and a half almost that we've seen Orban continuously in power, there has been a proliferation of particularly business interests that want these ties to Russia, to China, to continue and to deepen. And some of these interests really run to the highest levels of the Hungarian government. I mean, the defense minister, Tamás Szalay-Bobrovnicki, has been reputed to have, many joint business ventures in Russia. Yet that does not really seem to resonate very strongly in the Hungarian imagination.
We've had this discussion about Hungary before, and some things are kind of obvious, but I'm still kind of trying to wrap my head around the fact maybe the word that you use, delusion of grandeur, makes perfect sense, because somehow these kind of people with that kind of mindset think that all the others are weak, and therefore somebody like Putin would gladly talk to them about their interests and not see that every single person like Putin only goes after their own interests. So this is an interesting take on it. Never thought about it before.
Well, so I think there are countries in Eastern Europe, Central Europe, that are small and are comfortable with being small. Estonia and Slovakia and Slovenia, they don't mind having these sort of relatively small roles in the EU and so on and so forth. And then there are, small countries. Then there are also sort of, big countries that can play a significant role like Poland. And then finally, there are, small countries that somehow are sort of nurturing these grievances about the sort of grand role that they played in the past. Hungary, Serbia, where the discourse around geopolitical issues is very much modeled after, the Russian view of the world, in which, grave injustices have been perpetrated on us. And we have to reclaim our rightful position on the global stage. And so that's something that does resonate in Hungary. Now, Mark, to your original question about, what's the deal with Republicans and Orban? It's a question I've been asking myself a lot. I think Orban has been a very effective political operator, including in Washington. He, obviously because of his style of politics, the way he has governed, has burned many bridges, but at the same time, he has really sought to appeal to the, as you put it, MAGA constituency, the MAGA wing of the Republican Party. I mean, he went went in, full Trump in 2017. Hungarian government officials were promoting conspiracy theories regarding the 2020 election in the United States, much to the pleasure of Donald Trump and his circle. So there has been a lot of that going on. He's been a frequent visitor and the host of the CPAC conference, which is kind of a sort of conference hosting the sort of most ideological and most sort of activist wing of the Republican Party. So he has really made a lot of effort to be part of that ecosystem, mostly by weighing in on culture war issues, starting originally with immigration in 2015, 2016, but also then branching out into questions of, gender, LGBTQ rights, natalist policies in Hungary. I mean, this sort of idea that you can sort of reverse adverse demographic trends by throwing more money at sort of family, pro-family policies and so on and so forth. So he has sort of established some credentials in those circles. At the same time, it's worth saying that I think this has been largely opportunistic on his part. I mean, people, who like Tucker Carlson and Rod Dreher and others who sort of look at Hungary and see this some sort of epitome of conservative politics, I think are also deluding themselves. I mean, Hungary is actually, when it comes to social and cultural mores and norms, a fairly liberal place where things like access to abortion or gay rights have never really had much salience in the public conversation. And when you look at actual policies undertaken by Orban, it would be very hard to sell any of that sort of socially conservative stuff to Hungarian voters. It's a very different place from Poland, where, you have a actually commanding majority of, Catholics that take their Catholicism seriously, where in the, most recent government you had Catholic integralists calling the shots. It's just, they've never seen that in a place like Hungary. So it has always been a bit of a sort of stylized sort of pose on his part, but it has worked wonders, and it has actually brought him a lot of goodwill on the part of people who, normally would rally against China, yet would give Orban a pass when Orban rebuked even the Trump administration over the Huawei issue, if you remember, in 2019, when Secretary Pompeo was lobbying Central European countries to basically divest away from Huawei in building their 5G networks. And Huawei has had by that point had a massive long-term presence in Hungary dating back to 2010, 2011. I was just setting up a research center in Budapest. During the pandemic, you might also recall that they tried to lure the Fudan University from Shanghai to set up a campus in Budapest. That led to a public outcry. It was revealed that the cost would exceed the annual funding to all universities in Hungary taken together. So people took it to the streets, and ultimately Orban backed off. But for whatever reason, this particular wing of the conservative movement of the Republican Party is willing to give Orban a pass on basically acting against America's geopolitical interests for the sake of, taking the right position as they see it on culture wars.
But is it like we joked about in this podcast before about fascist international, like communist international, but fascist this time? Is it like completely ideological, or is there some kind of transactional part as well? Because like we know that Orban's pro-Russian position is not just because of his likeness of Putin or some kind of ideological likeness to these regimes, but also it's transactional because we know there's a lot of Russian-Hungarian linked corruption. Also, Russia gives huge discounts for oil and gas to Hungary, and Hungary is I'm not sure if now, but it was exempted from the EU sanctions on gas and oil.
Rosatom did build a nuclear power plant in Russia
Yeah.
very recently as well, so that's the thing.
So there have been a number of these joint projects. I mean, the PAX nuclear power plant, the fact that Hungary at some point served as the venue for the new headquarters of the International Investment Bank, which basically was a spying organization during the Cold War. And they sort of moved to Budapest and were granted all the diplomatic immunities and privileges. And it took really the threat of US sanctions last year for them to sort of relent and kick them out. But, you know, even throughout this full scale invasion of Ukraine, there have been Russian diplomats working at this International Investment Bank in Budapest, an EU member country, that were able to also bypass any sanctions lists and bring in people from Russia, if it served the interest of the bank, because that was part of the bilateral treaty between the bank and the government of Hungary. So, I mean, it is true that Orban has gone out of his way to serve Russian and to some extent also Chinese interests. And, you know, again, big part of that is, you know, sort of material benefits that various sort of interest groups around him are getting from that. I alluded to the defense minister and his business ventures, but obviously in the area of energy and sort of energy connected sort of corruption, like there are great opportunities to make money. And one thing you have to sort of realize about Hungary is that it's a small country, one in which economic power is very easy to centralize. It's a country where, I mean, there is, you know, a great deal of sort of manufacturing as sort of an extension of the German automotive industry, but also it is in per capita terms probably the largest recipient of EU funding in the European Union, and that funding basically flows into the country through the hands of the government, and it has led to a situation in which there is a very effective patronage scheme that has Orban at the top and his cronies and relatives and friends at various, you know, sort of ranks of the ladder, and it's an economy that is very conducive to, you know, corruption and working with sort of, you know, dirty money and money laundering schemes and so on and so forth. So that's not exactly news in the Hungarian context.
You talked about the power which Hungary once had and now doesn't, but wants to, and feels like it's a equal partner to Russia. Well, Hungarian main asset is that it is like, it can be an asset for Russia or China, but mainly Russia inside the EU, inside NATO, and now inside Republican Party for some reason, although he doesn't have veto power in that organization, fortunately. How does EU, how does NATO, how does United States government sees that? Isn't it like time to act, time to change something in the relationships? Why is there such a dependency on Hungary from the EU side, from American side, all the time on all kind of decision, and like on one of the most critical decisions right now in terms of international security?
I would even pose the question differently. Like, we know that they need unilateral voting, so that is a given. But I mean, it's not like these things were made virtually, so as not. I mean, the whole idea is not to be a hostage of a single country when that many countries depend on certain important topics. So, what is there even? I'm not even going to say, like Mark said, like why, and I would say what can be done to kind of solve this reason, given the, Orban's obviously personal ambitions that they are there. Also, that has to do with what you said, but I guess also to him as for many politicians, good or bad, his personal ambitions are kind of the most important, right?
So I suppose it's worth sort of disentangling the issue. So on the one hand, you really do have this sort of outsized influence that Orban plays in the imaginations of thought leaders in the Republican Party. And that's a reality, but I don't think it necessarily translates into his influence over actual policy. So even this meeting at the Heritage Foundation and Orban's trip to Washington and so on, I frankly am skeptical that it will sort of move the needle on how House members will vote on the supplemental bill for Ukraine. I mean, as you do know, it's a complicated situation. There are people in the Senate and House have different ideas about how to tie Ukraine aid to border security and so on and so forth. I think that these events will sort of play out more or less independently of what Orban does or say, or what tweets the Heritage Foundation puts out. What worries me more is the fact that both the EU and NATO are to some extent consensus-driven organizations in which you need the assent of all the members to move ahead with new policies, to open accession talks with Ukraine, to sign off on that 50 billion euro fund for supporting Ukraine over the next 3 years. And in all of those cases, Hungary has been a sort of source of veto power or blockage, and has used these very important issues to sort of extract concessions for the Orban regime. It's not easy to change the institutional architecture either in the EU or NATO. I don't think we are going to move away in the EU from basically unanimity-based decision-making on matters that member states see as vital to their national interests. But at the same time, I think it is past time to sort of start thinking about how to treat Hungary differently from other member states. And I mean that in just purely political terms, because it is not possible, it's not tenable any longer, in my opinion, to deal with Orban's Hungary as a sort of good faith actor that merely has policy disagreements with the rest of the EU. Since we've seen that the government has really sort of used all the procedures and all the levels of power that it has had at its disposal to basically be a source of frictions, to advance Russian and Chinese interests, to harm Ukraine. We've seen that even way before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, where Hungarians were systematically vetoing Ukrainian participation at NATO summits back 6-7 years ago. So this has been perfectly commonplace, and I think it is important to start thinking about ways to work around Hungary rather than throwing ourselves into these kind of pointless negotiations and bargaining in which Hungarians will never get everything that they ask for, but they will always be able to extract some form of concessions from the EU. I mean, in the Ukrainian context, there has been awful lot of sort of conditioning that the Ukrainians that the Hungarians have made on in which they would say that they were going to veto sanctions against Russia, aid to Ukraine, whatever was on the table, unless EU money destined for Hungary would be unfrozen, therefore making the EU sort of look away from the violations of rule of law and domestic corruption and so on and so forth. And I don't think that's a particularly sort of healthy incentive structure that the EU is setting up by playing this game at every juncture. I do worry, though, that this time might be different and even worse than the previous iterations. So this summit that's coming on the 14th and 15th, that should make a final binding decision on the accession talks and on this 50 billion fund for Ukraine, that actually Orban might just say no to both of them or almost certainly to the accession talks, because I mean the way he has already sort of pre-committed to this position strikes me as very difficult for him to just get a few billion euros for Hungary and walk away. So I think we have to brace ourselves for a situation in which Hungary will effectively hold Ukraine and indeed the rest of the EU hostage. I think what needs to happen is for Europeans to sort of think about more creatively about what can be done in the EU that does not necessarily involve all member countries, especially when we are talking about new initiative, new sort of policy frameworks. The idea was always that we do everything together as a sort of, the community method that is called. So EU 27 works together on everything. And you could actually envisage situations in which you would have sort of smaller coalitions of the willing doing things. And I think we are at the point where I think we should be by default excluding Hungary from, any new initiatives. And there are many examples of how this works in practice. Things like PESCO, the structured cooperation on defense, basically is a structure that enables sort of smaller groups of countries to work together and come up with, new defense projects. I think we should sort of learn from that and sort of scale it up in a way that would enable the EU to kind of work around Hungary. And technically Hungary is going to remain a member state of the EU. It's very hard to change that. It's going to remain a member state of NATO. It's very hard to change that, but I think we have to adapt the way we work in these institutional structures so that Victor Orban can't hold the entire collective West hostage.
Yep. We hope something will change. Probably it should have been done long ago, maybe even before the Russian invasion to Ukraine and before the whole when the blackmail started. But thank you, Dalibor.
Yeah.
It is what it is. Dalibor. Yeah, we have to live with that. Thank you, Dalibor. Thank you for listening, and we'll be back in a week with our new podcast, hopefully with some positive topic to discuss.
Thank you so much, and Slava Ukraini.
Heroyam Slava.
Heroyam Slava. Thank you very much.
Please subscribe to the channel, leave a comment. What do you think about all of this? Put a like on this video and share it with your friends, especially this video is very important for our friends in America, especially, who might now be interested why the hell some Hungarians will meet with some Republicans. Well, there you go. So, we're doing God's work here, trying to educate people on things they never knew they should care about. See you next week.